for this webinar organized by Sustainability Week International. So maybe you can go to the next slide, Marie-Claire. As you already know, the webinar will be about international negotiations on climate change and on YOUNGO specifically. Why YOUNGO, Marie-Claire will tell you later why this is a really interesting group where you could be active as well. So my name is Patrick. I'm co-president of Sustainability Week International, and I'm also engaged in YOUNGO, currently in the bottom line team. You will see later what that means. But the webinar today will be mainly conducted by Marie-Claire because she has a lot of experience. She's in YOUNGO for about 2.5 years. So since COP23, she was always following the negotiations. And last year at COP25, even as an official member of the Swiss delegation, so negotiating actually on behalf of the government of Switzerland. This year, she is the focal point of YOUNGO, so I would say the main position within for the connecting to the UNFCCC. Yeah, and she will tell you more about this because she has a lot of experience and she knows what's going on. Please, Marie-Claire.
Great, thank you so much, Patrick, for the very nice introduction, and I'm very happy to be here and yeah, tell you a little bit about the international climate negotiation, because everyone is impacted and affected by the international climate negotiations. And also in particular, I really want to tell you how you can get involved if you're interested. I guess most of you are already into the sustainability weeks, but maybe you have still some more energy and want to be involved. And if there is any question, please drop them in the chat box. Also, we will record a webinar that others who couldn't join due to the time zones can listen to it later on. As Patrick already mentioned, I will tell you a little bit about the international climate negotiations. As we can see on the overview, I will first talk a little bit about this acronym UNFCCC. It stands for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, basically the international space where all the countries are coming together, but also civil society and young people to talk about the international climate politics. And as you probably have all heard about the Paris Agreement, I will give you a little bit of introduction into it and explain you some of the main parts of it, because it can be really complicated and really tough to read. But then, as mentioned, I really want to talk about the role of young people and where the young people are fitting the structure and how you, as a young person, can get involved. As mentioned, Patrick told already that I was, as an official negotiator and the youngest ever member of the Swiss delegation at the last COP. COP stands for Conference of the Parties, basically the annual event where all the countries are coming together to deliberate and negotiate on the future of the international climate policies. I will tell you a little bit about the outcomes and also on the perspectives for this year and also for next year, for the next upcoming conference, and as well how this is impacted by COVID, because we are all obviously also affected by it. And then at the end, we already got some questions on yeah, how we can deal with the situation we have and how can we make change beyond our personal lifestyle choices. For example, yeah, try to live as climate friendly as possible, but what else can be done? Okay, as mentioned, when there is any question, please put them in the box, chat box. I'm going to answer them as soon as possible. As mentioned, a very, very quick overview of the international climate negotiations. So the discussions already started before most of us has actually been on this planet. So in 1990, there was the first conference where they started to talk about the that we need a framework to talk on an international level about the climate policies. And 2 years later, there was this famous Earth Summit, Rio Earth Summit, where they adopted 3 major conventions. One is the Climate Convention, which is the UNFCCC. One is the Convention on Biodiversity, One is the Convention on Desertification, and these three together built these environmental conventions. It took them quite some time, 5 years, to adopt the first legal document, which was the Kyoto Protocol. You might have already heard about it. But then, unfortunately, it took them even longer. It took them another 8 years until it entered into force when Russia implemented their own instrument, because as you might know, all international agreements on the environment are not legally binding. So even if the countries are in favor of it and adopt it, it still needs to be ratified in the country itself, that then it can enter into force. So you can see 1990, we started talking about this even earlier, and it took us, unfortunately, 15 years to act, despite the science was since the very beginning very clear that we are already in a climate crisis. 2009, there was probably the major failure of climate negotiation in Copenhagen. The countries couldn't find any common ground on how to move on because the Kyoto Protocol was weak. There were some challenges and they needed a new agreement. But luckily, 6 years later, 2015, was a big success in Paris with the Paris Agreement. And also this, we are now still working internationally under the Kyoto Protocol, but by the end of the year, so by the 1st of January, the Paris Agreement, it's already into force, but basically the Kyoto Protocol will end, so we will work under the Paris Agreement. So you see, it's quite a long time frame. So for me, it's more than the whole life on Earth. Yeah, but it's very clear that we have to speed the process up. And also that's why young people are very, very important. Now it's in 2019-20, we are finalizing the so-called rule book, basically how we are implementing the Paris Agreement, because as you probably all know, it's nice to have goals, but if you then don't know how to implement it, yeah, it probably stays only a goal and will never enter into force and will not be implemented. So that's the point we are working on now. And I read the Paris Agreement because I had to, but it's quite tough. It's a lot of very technical words. That's why I really quickly want to give you a short overview. You will also find the whole document online, so you can really get into it if you're interested. But I guess this is nice for an overview. The whole Paris Agreement consists of 29 different articles, and I outlined here the most important ones. So it is structured in different parts. So the one is really about the action. So how, what actions are needed to fulfill the Paris Agreement? And then what supporting structures do we need that these actions can then be implemented? And then obviously there are also some organizational parts. So the third paragraph, I mean, the first one is about the definition. There's a preamble and there's a definition, then it's the purpose. I will also talk about the purpose just afterwards. But then I think Article 3 is very important. It's this acronym NDC. It stands for National Determined Contribution. Basically, it's, as mentioned, because it's international, so it's not legally binding. But through this instrument, which is called the NDCs, this National Determined Contributions, the countries themselves, so all the countries, wherever you're coming from, all of them give a national determined contribution, and they are outlining how they are going to achieve the Paris Agreement. So it's basically a document, a national document, which is contributing to the Paris Agreement. And then there will be a review of all these different NDCs. And then every 5 years, they have to enhance their ambitions. So this is the main instrument they are using. Then there are some other parts about mitigation. I will talk about this later on. Also about reforestation, also about adaptation, loss and damage, because I guess some of you have already faced different threats by the climate crisis. Also here in Switzerland, where the glaciers are melting, this has an effect obviously on the water regulations, but also on small island states, or also on coastal areas where we have a rise of sea level. Then very important in the supporting structures, obviously the finance, who is going to pay. This is one of the biggest deliberations or fights at the international climate negotiations. Who is paying how much to whom, and what can be, what actions are we going to pay. Also technology, how can we use the power of technology for the better. And then I think Article 11 and 12 is something which you are already all doing with the Sustainability Week, capacity building and education. Basically, there is an international agreement, but how can we really involve everyone and truly leave no one behind, taking everyone on board and support everyone through capacity building, sharing knowledge, but also involving a lot of people in the decision making, because we truly believe that only if everyone has a saying, the best solutions can be figured out. Also in Article 12, where it's all about education, raising awareness, exactly. And then there are some rather organizational matters about, for example, transparency or compliance, or when are the parties going to meet. So I think it's less interesting. And what I already mentioned, so every 5 years they have this so-called global stock take. Basically all the countries are coming together and say what they have been doing. You can think it's like in a, you coming together in a class and everyone is saying what they have been up to, and then they will we will do a stock take, so we see where everyone is at the moment, and then obviously try to enhance the ambitions that we are more ambitious and can better fight the climate crisis. The overarching or the central aim of the Paris Agreement is to strengthen the global response to the threat of the climate crisis. And it really aims to strengthen the ability of all the parties, and the parties in this context are the countries, to deal with the impact. As we have heard, it's about afforestation, about technology, it's about education, about climate finance. All of this is how do we strengthen the countries that they are able to combat the climate crisis and also its impact. And the overarching game is to transition to a sustainable and low carbon future. And as you are might aware, increase or holding the increase of the average global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees above the pre-industrial level, but really trying to put a lot of efforts into limit it to 1.5, because there was a very shocking report by the end of 2018, where a lot of scientists around the world were looking into the difference of global warming, the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees, and it was really devastating. So now the international community is really trying to put a lot of effort to rather decrease it to 0.5, but I will also show you a graph that we are not on track with 2 or 1.5 degrees, but at least that's the goal. As I was mentioning before, mitigation and adaptation, these are the two big words at the climate conference. So if you already understand these two words, you're already pretty good. So basically mitigation are all the different efforts to reduce emissions in the atmosphere. And this is done through enhanced so-called sinks. This can be done very naturally through forests, through also ocean, through sustainable agriculture. The soils are taking a lot of CO2 emissions and other greenhouse emissions from the air, capture it naturally, but also it can be done technically, which is very often very expensive and very risky. But nevertheless, some of the researchers are saying that it is not possible to only focus on natural solutions anymore. There's also a huge discussion, but basically mitigation is everything when you try to bring down the emissions while reducing the emissions, taking it out of the air and putting it back into the soil, into the water, into plants, and with this reduce the emissions in the atmosphere. This also goes into different policies, but I think something to always try to give you some examples. Also, this can be done and how we produce energy, so trying to use renewable energies. This can be done through water, wind, but also nuclear. This is always a big deliberation. Some are saying it's not renewable, some are saying it's renewable. At the moment it's classified as a renewable energy source, but also solar. But there are many more, as you're probably aware of, versus obviously the big four fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, but also different other oil sands and so on. So trying to move the whole energy sector towards renewable energy is also an act of mitigation, because with this we reduce the CO2 and the greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere. The other word, which is very often used, is adaptation. So adaptation refers to all the different adjustments in the system to respond to the climate crisis, because there are already effects and impacts. Some islands are already flooded, some glaciers are already melted, some deserts are already here, some ecosystems are already threatened. So we cannot only focus on mitigation, but we already have to adapt, because it's too late. As I have been showing on the first graph, it took us so long to come up with something that there are already effects. We have to adapt, and we cannot only mitigate. So basically it refers to different changes in processes, practices, and different structures to then try to support these countries or communities to adapt and somehow then still benefit from a new situation, and yeah, having new opportunities. For example, a lot of islands, when the floods are coming, try to support them building dams that they can still have a livelihood and continue their life. I was mentioning about these so-called NDCs, the national determined contributions. So how—
Just a second, Marie-Claire. There was a question about the national adaptation plans. How can they play a role for the individual countries to implement Paris Agreement? I guess that's fitting this slide.
Perfect. Sorry, I don't see actually the chat box. Good, thanks for the reminder. Yeah, so the instrument to implement adaptation on a national level are exactly the NAPs, the National Adaptation Plans. They're really important because basically they are outlining how the country is adapting to the situation. So I would say the National Adaptation Plans in conjunction with the NDCs, I'm just going to explain here, are some of the major tools to implement the Paris Agreement. And luckily, some of the countries actually do open consultations. So maybe you can try to check on your government, and if you have any ideas on how to, or maybe you have a proposal or something on adaptation, you might be able to hand it in. I have heard they are sometimes really open to it, but it's really, really crucial, especially for countries who are on the front lines of the climate crisis and are yeah, threatened by it. But for all the countries, it's really important to have ambitious NDCs. And yeah, the first ones were already handed in back in 2015, 2016, and now 2020, 5 years afterwards. Yeah, we have to hand in the second round and raise our ambitions. Unfortunately, not all of the countries are doing this. For example, Japan just handed it in, the same as before, not ambitious. Most of the countries didn't yet hand in something very ambitious. And as you can see on the right graph, it looks a little bit confusing, but basically it's just showing that we are not on track with 2 degrees, we're not on track with 1.5. We are at the moment, yeah, still heading to, on the global average, to +3 degrees, which will be for some places really devastating and lead to a lot of yeah, crises, human crises, food crises, ecosystem crises. So basically you see the different blue lines, the thinny blue lines. So these will be the scenarios trying to be in line with 2 degrees. And yeah, at the moment we are still in a slight increase. So you see where it's written INDCs, that's where the current climate policies are going. And also when you're, the blue lines are giving actually a 50% chance to stay below 2 degrees. So I don't know if you would enter, for example, a car if you know that you have only a 50% chance to actually arrive at a destination you wanted to go. So we are completely off track where we have to go. Not even a direction is the right one. So we absolutely need to increase the ambitions. And that's, I think, where YOUNGO the official children and youth constituency to the UNFCCC comes in, because young people, probably like yourself, are very determined, because it's our future, and our future yeah, is at the moment is under risk. So a lot of young people take it up, and that's why I wanted to quickly talk about YOUNGO and the importance of YOUNGO, and also how you can be involved in this movement.
Just one question before we end the international negotiations. A question was, how can we approach governments which are choosing construction of corruption in place of sustainability, like Bangladesh?
Yes, that's a very tricky question, especially because corruption is very hard to beat. So what I can send afterwards some links where there are some negotiators who might be open. So you can approach them and try to support them constructively. And on the other side, if you're in a network like YOUNGO, where there are a lot of people, so there are around 8,000 young people, so the likelihood that there is someone else, for example, from Bangladesh, who has already experienced, or maybe is even somehow affiliated with the government, or has been working with the government together, is in the network. And so there is a higher likelihood that you might find someone who can support you. Also, if you're on the ground at the conference, which is at the moment obviously not not possible, it's a really good opportunity, because basically all these negotiators, presidents, ministers are on the ground, so you can rather easily approach them. If you're not there, then I would suggest that you try to, with the link I'm going to send you afterwards, that you try to reach out to a dedicated person, and that they might be able to connect you to the government. Exactly. But I think that's a perfect intro for YOUNGO, why YOUNGO is so important. Yeah, I will quickly say what YOUNGO is, our values, vision and mission, about the membership structure and the different work streams, also how you can yeah, get involved. So YOUNGO is the official youth constituency. I will come in a minute what a constituency is, but basically it's the place where young people in the UNFCCC have a saying. As you can see on the picture, a lot of young people from all around the world are coming together, have networking obviously, but also really work on concrete policies, how to approach, for example, different countries if they are not doing well in the negotiations, but also try to approach negotiators and delegations on try to get yeah, better involved. Constituencies, this goes also back actually to the Earth Summit in Rio, where the countries or the parties agreed that, of course, it's a party-driven process, so only the parties themselves have a saying and only they can take the decisions at the end. But nevertheless, they said we have to be more inclusive, and they came up with 9 important groups of civil society. And you can see them all here on the slide. So it can be the researcher, it can be the businesses, women and gender, indigenous people, environmental NGOs, but also, for example, cities or local communities, the farmers and the trade unions, but also children and youth. In the UNFCCC, we call it YOUNGO, which stands for Youth NGO. As you can all see, Ringo, Bingo, Ingo. Exactly, so YOUNGO is the official civil society place for young people in the process. YOUNGO itself is structured has no hierarchies, it has a flat structure with different working groups I'm going to talk in a minute. All the decisions are taken by consensus, and we have some decision-making processes, and as well, all different NGOs have the same saying. So if you're from a small NGO or from a big one, your voice will be equally heard in the system. And maybe fun fact, YOUNGO is the oldest and largest volunteer-run children and youth constituency to any UN body. So we have quite some experience, but yeah, we have still a lot of things to improve. Here you can see our values and principles. We really try to also live and inherit what we wish for the future, so that we are open, transparent, that we stand up for justice and equality, that we are hopeful and have empowerment within our actions. and so on. So our vision is to empower children and young people from all around the world, that they can take action and really enhance their skills, the needed skills for this climate negotiation, but also the capacity to then be able to be the drivers of these necessary ambitions for better climate action and policies at all different levels, that we have a livable and climate just future. So it's really about young people. It's the whole constituency is run by young people, so we consider everyone young under the age of 35. It's a learning and sharing place for young people, to young people. Our 4 areas of our mission, that's like how we try to fulfill our vision, is awareness, knowledge sharing, and capacity building. It's all about collaboration, network, and cooperation. We are very much involved in also policy development, as I already mentioned, the lobby and advocacy aspect, but also really important, we are young people, we have the right also to take action, do demonstrations, do creative paintings, or yeah, come up with other creative actions. So in the first part of our mission, where it's about awareness, knowledge, and capacity building, also, for example, this webinar here could also be counted as something where we do capacity building and knowledge sharing. So through different formats, sometimes on the ground, but also online, we try to build up capacity and skills of young people in different areas. Can be, for example, very technical on how to negotiate, or what is the latest negotiation on the different on a specific item, but it can also be very in general how the processes are working. It can also be soft skills on how to write policy papers and how to be engaged, or how to best approach different negotiators. It's all about the best practices. Exactly, and also we really think that a lot of people who are coming, they are not familiar with the process themselves, but they have so much knowledge. So we really want to listen and give the floor to as many young people, and we can yeah, learn from everyone. And we do this through webinars throughout the year, through workshops on the ground. Yeah. The second part was about collaboration and cooperation and network. We as young people cannot do it all alone. That's why we have different constituencies. That's why there are different treaties under the United Nations. That's why we have countries who are supporting. And yeah, that's how we try for different topics, find our collaboration and network, that we can better align our demands with others to, yeah, to move on and really push the parties to then take more ambitious decisions, that at the end the overarching policies are better and more strong. Then, as already mentioned, the policy, lobby, and advocacy part, we as young people really advocate for pragmatic, responsible, and ambitious climate policies, because yeah, our future is under threat. That's why we have the right, for example, to do submissions. So this is a written paper where we are saying we demand X, Y, Z. We can do interventions. Basically, we can take the floor, the mic, and say something. We bring in an element of human rights or youth inclusion, and try and have different activities on how we are trying to bring our voice across, despite we cannot take any decisions, so we are not allowed to vote. But with our different activities, we try to at least influence the negotiations on an international, but also national level. And then youth actions. Young people are really good at mobilizing and taking creative action. This has also been shown as a really effective tool to also influence the negotiations and remind the negotiators that our future is under threat. And yeah, they have it in their hands. They have the right to vote. We don't. But yeah, and also stand in solidarity with youth actions around the world. So this is our fourth component to our mission. As already mentioned, membership, we are open. Basically, you can just sign up when you're under the age of 35. You don't have to have any pre-knowledge. It's for free. It doesn't matter which country you're coming from. Even if you would be stateless, you are welcome. So we are really inclusive, and we really, as already mentioned in the values, we really want to have a diverse group of people. So whenever you're interested, please join, and never hesitate, especially when you are not yet familiar with the process, because this was one of our aims, building capacity of young people, that they understand the process. You don't have to be an expert, and many of us are, like me, also Patrick and others, are learning on a daily basis. So as mentioned, YOUNGO consists of individuals and organizations. There are at the moment around 300 youth organizations who are part of YOUNGO, and over 7,000 individuals. It's really hard to to count it, because a lot of people are somehow part. We are all connected digitally via our official mailing list, which is our standard communication tool, but there are also a lot of other informal channels as Facebook, WhatsApp, Slack, and other groups. But yeah, the core of what YOUNGO is are the individual and organizations who are part of. And to then work effectively, we have different teams who dedicate time and their knowledge on different topics. So we have around 20 different working groups which work on specific thematic parts which are under negotiation, for example, adaptation or mitigation or education, or finance, but also rather underlying topic, for example, inclusion of young people, human rights, the importance of oceans or science. They are also groups who focus, for example, on communication, managing our social media channels. There are teams who are coordinating the actions, as already mentioned, and also, taking care of that the participation is running smoothly of everyone, but also supporting on policy, how to draft the statements, and so on. And everyone can join. It's really based on your individual expression of interest. There is no selection. All of the groups are free to take part. Whenever there is, also when there is only one topic, for example, you are very keen on working on agriculture and climate change, you can also focus only on agriculture. That's totally fine. You don't have to be involved in all the other topics. Exactly. As Patrick mentioned in the beginning, he is a member of the bottom lining team. So the bottom lining team is a group of very dedicated and experienced volunteers who are providing oversight and facilitate and support the smooth work of the whole constituency. They, as mentioned, obviously have no decision-making mandate. They are neutral, so they are supporting the whole work. And I'm this year currently elected. There are 2 people elected from the constituency to serve as focal points. Basically, we are doing liaison work between the young people, the youth constituency, and different UN bodies, but of course, especially the UNFCCC. Also, we don't have any decision-making mandate, and we're also neutral, so we make sure that the constituency knows what is going on. And we are annual elected at the COPs. There is always one focal point from the Global North, this year from Switzerland, and there is one from Global South this year from India, my co-focal point. Exactly. Normally we are elected annually at the COP, but this year no COP will happen due to the COVID crisis. So yeah, let's see when the next COP will happen and when new elections are happening. So as mentioned, the policy team is here to bring our demands to the table where the decision makers are. On the top picture, you can see the Secretary General of the UNFCCC, Espinosa, and on the bottom picture, you can see Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations. So we have sometimes you have the opportunity to interact also with very high level people, but of course on a daily during the sessions we meet a lot of different negotiators from all the countries and make them aware of our demands. Here you see some of the different actions. This can be large protests, this can be die-ins or sit-ins or singing or dancing or posters and banners to remind everyone what we are doing here, because sometimes when you're at this conference, there are 25,000 people, it's huge, you're running around, and then sometimes you tend to forget why we're actually here. So it's really good to have youth actions who are reminding everyone what we are fighting for. And also the communications team, which is supporting our social media channels and yeah, carrying the words and what we are doing out to the world, because of course not everyone can be here, but we try our best to, yeah, to listen to everyone and yeah, spread the word through the social media channels. Then very quickly, before I'm coming to an end, there we have the Conference of Youth. Basically, it's always happening just prior to the Conference of the Parties. So mostly it's happening for 3 days. And this is the place where young people from around the world are coming together and strategize, and network, working on different policies, that when the COP is starting, we are ready, because obviously the countries also prepare themselves when they're going to COP. So we also prepare ourselves when we are going to COP. So this is the Conference of Youth. It was organized last year in Chile, but then, as you might have heard, the conference got shifted from Chile to Madrid. So within 3 weeks, we had to set up a whole new Conference of Youth in Madrid. That's also where Patrick and I have been taking part, and it's really inspiring because you meet hundreds of young people from around the world who are all as dedicated as you and interested in yeah, make the world a better place. Yeah, basically the mission is that we empower young people, that they are ready for the climate conference and really can take action on the international level, but also on the local level, also try to give them something back, thematic, what they can bring home. Yeah, I guess that's already mentioned: capacity building, sharing knowledge, experience, and building up a network and the movement to be ready when we enter the climate negotiations. Also, because we know not everyone can join the international climate conferences, we have a format called Local Conference of Youth, where you can organize all over the world. We have a toolkit, we can support you. They're always happening just a little bit prior to the COI, so in the month before COP is happening, so very often in the fall on the global north, in the spring in the global south. And yeah, then there can also be, for example, an outcome which can be delivered to the national but also international level. With this, we try to, yeah, listen to the voices from around the world and yeah, have everyone's voice heard on the international level as well. This year, we don't really know how and when we can organize the Local Conference of Youth due to COVID, but yeah, let's hope it's soon over, that we can, yeah, work on this again. Also here you can see we are really global. Some of the countries are not yet part, but yeah, we are really aiming for having the voice of all young people from around the world heard. Exactly. So as Patrick mentioned in the beginning, I was at COP25, the last World Climate Conference, as an official negotiator and member of the delegation for Switzerland. So this gave me a complete different role than I have ever had before. Before, I always joined as an activist, civil society, youth person, and now I transitioned to representing my own government, the government of Switzerland. I had the pleasure to be able to negotiate on different topics, the topics I love: education, capacity building, but also gender-related issues and technology transfer. And yeah, it was super interesting. It's incredibly busy, so you don't get a lot of sleep and you're running around, especially if you cover several topics. It can be really tough because some of the countries are not acknowledging the importance, for example, of education or gender-related issues. Yeah, but it was an amazing learning curve, and I would have been back at the intersessionals, but also the climate conferences this year, but they're not going to happen. So we have to see how we are still keeping up the momentum. Yeah, but I think it was a wonderful opportunity, especially because the government was giving a young person the trust that that young people can also contribute meaningfully in the process. And I think this is a really brilliant sign, and beside my mandates to obviously work on the content, I really try to convince other countries and parties that they are taking young people into delegation and give them official training and mandates to also be able to negotiate, because basically we are the future of the climate negotiations. So we have also to be trained and included. Yeah, so the day at COP starts very early. So we basically have the first internal negotiations in the team, deliberations at 7. Then at 8, we have the discussions as a whole delegation of Switzerland. Then at 9, we have it with the different groupings. There are different groupings in the UNFCCC in the negotiations. And then from 10 to 1, there is the first block of negotiations where we split into rooms, as you can see on the bottom left or on the top right. And then we go very into the details of different comma sentences. We share on, yeah, we talk about the texts, and then there is a short break, which normally is used for exchanging with others, not really for eating. And yeah, then there's another block from 3 to 5, 6, 7, but can end up as 1 in the morning, where we continue our negotiations. And yeah, this then goes on for 2 weeks. Starts from Monday, goes until Friday, with a weekend in between where Sunday is off, while Saturday is a work day. So it's really, really tough. And also this COP has been the longest COP ever. We finalized at lunchtime on Sunday, so it was plus 44 hours. And unfortunately, we still couldn't conclude and find the solution for the still open topics. So this was, at least my parts went well, but other parts are still under negotiations, which are not really good. But yeah, this also brings me to the outlook. Now we are here in 2020, which was supposed to be the super year, because there have been different high-level events around ocean, biodiversity, climate. All of it cannot happen now. Everything is shifted to 2021. I do hope that it's not affecting our long-term ambition and implementation, because the climate crisis is not waiting until COVID is over. But yeah, basically here you see how the long-term goal or the timetable looks like. And yeah, with the overarching goal to be net zero latest on a global scale by 2050. Exactly. And this brings me to the end of my input, and I see now there are some questions. And also to mention that the Sustainability Week International will become a member of YOUNGO very soon, and so you all can sign up. We can afterwards also share the sign up form, so you can all, it's very easy, it really takes you some minutes to sign up there. You will be added to the mailing list I was mentioning, and then you can start to be getting involved in different working groups as mentioned. And yeah, I hope maybe to see some of you at an upcoming conference. But now over to you, Patrick.
So thanks a lot for all these insights. Maybe, I don't know, do you have the latest updates on the time or when the SBs and COP26 are postponed?
Yeah, so normally, as mentioned, we have the annual conference of the parties always happening November, December, and in between there is the intermediate conference called the subsidiary body meeting, or as Patrick mentioned, the SB that's happening in May, June. So the SB is now shifted to October, but from my point of view, it's very unlikely that this is going to happen. But anyway, this is the plan, that we have the intermediate conference in October. And we just had this week a call with the COP26 team from the UK, and they mentioned that the COP is not going to happen before May 2021. So it will be shifted for probably half a year until to a year. They are thinking that probably COP26 is going to be shifted for 1 year. So it will happen in November 2021. So it's a very long time.
And that brings me also to the other question. In the current situation, what should be vision as working during lockdown?
So I think we have to we cannot focus anymore on COP because, as mentioned, it takes forever until COP is coming and the climate crisis is not going to wait. So I think and also as mentioned, this year we have to update the NDCs. So I think something what young people can do within YOUNGO, but also outside, try to get somehow in contact with the government or some governmental representatives or negotiators to say that it's important to really increase the ambitions. And if you have already the knowledge and capacity to come up with some ideas on how to strengthen it, there are, for example, some webinars organized by YOUNGO on how this can be done. But also, I mean, yeah, as mentioned, what the Sustainability Week is doing is education, raising awareness, creating networks and strengthen the implementation on a national or on a local level. So also organizing sustainability weeks. I mean, now it's not possible to do this physically, but maybe having some virtual events, trying to engage your community is also a brilliant example of what you can do now. Also learning more about the process you do now by attending this webinar, but also we can share some links afterwards with all of you where you can have a deeper insight and some more learning about the process, because then everything is possible again next year, you're super ready, prepared for the conferences.
Another question, what we should in this time to make forceful activities towards goodness of climate change?
Yeah, I think it goes aligned with what I have been answering before. Also now, due to COVID, we have an absolute unprecedented situation. And I think it's very interesting to think about what can we take from this time now. I mean, it's very inconvenient, of course, but what can we learn now from this crisis? First, of course, it's really absolute a disaster if the whole world is going into a crisis. A global crisis is very hard to respond. Also, when we talk about international solidarity, everyone is getting to me first, ego first. All the countries are trying to support themselves while not having any space for international cooperation. But also then that the food supplies, the health sector, everything is really under threat, really pushing it to the brinks of collapse. So I think this is the biggest learning, and then we can think, okay, what can we do against it? Of course, act early, listen to the scientists, having local resilience initiatives that local communities are resistant and don't depend on international trade streams, but of course also really try to influence the politics that they are implementing policies which are in favor of a climate friendly, just future.
So another question, what is the projection like towards post-COVID on climate emission?
Yeah, so at the moment we have a global drop in emissions and very significant. So it depends from countries. There is between 5 up to 50% of an emission reduction, which is incredible. I mean, if someone would have told me back in January or at the last climate conference that, yeah, by next spring we have a huge emission reduction up to 50%, I would have like, which planet are you talking about? But yeah, of course, it's a crisis. Of course, this is not what we want, because we want to have a just, a livable and a prosperity for our future. So we don't want to live in a crisis. Nevertheless, we can see change is possible. We can do it rapidly. We can do it in time. We can do it bold and unprecedented. But also that it's better if we can actually design the future we want to live in, not that actually nature is just putting limits and banning into our houses, putting lockdowns on everything. This is not what we want. We want to have a future where we can decide and design, but we have obviously to stay within the planetary boundaries. So yeah, we can see that all of this is possible, but we really have to speed up with our ambitions.
Good. Another question is, will the NDC revision also reflect on gender and youth mainstreaming for climate ambitions and actions? A good question.
Yeah, this is a very good question, and this is what YOUNGO is lobbying a lot. So we spend a lot of time meeting negotiators, reaching out to them, writing policy statements that they include education, gender, youth in their NDCs. Unfortunately, very little countries are doing it. So part of my work, what I'm now trying to do, is convince the Swiss government to involve gender, human rights, youth, and the importance of education in their NDC. If you want to have a look of a very successful NDC, you can check out the one from Chile. They have mentioned all of this. Some other small island development states like the Marshall Islands and another island state has implemented it. But the major ones, the major emitter ones, like the US, Japan, Russia, but also the EU, yeah, they didn't implement it yet. And that's also why young people are so crucial, because the negotiators are not going to do this by themselves. But if we put enough pressure on them, there is a likelihood that they're actually going to implement it. There will also be a webinar we can invite you where we exactly talk about this, how to implement youth and the importance of education in the NDC. It will probably happen in June, and we can all invite you, which gives you then maybe even more tools how you can influence your national determined contributions.
Just to comment on that, you can actually see the current NDCs of all the countries. They are you can find them on the UNFCCC website. And if you check the ones of your own country, for example, where you have the best view on that, it's quite shocking. I thought that Switzerland, for example, is a very progressive country in regards of climate change, but the NDC is really like, it's written only very, very basic things and far away from ambitious. And we're actually even just trying to get action on climate empowerment at all, not even just for youth, but for all groups of people into these NDCs, because yeah, they're just very, very basic for most countries. There is a question, is SWI having negotiations on climate change?
You mean the Sustainability Week International, if we are negotiating, or?
That's how I understand the question, but as Marie-Claire explained the process now, what we in SWI can do is we can join YOUNGO, because YOUNGO is the youth constituency, because the constituency is there to represent youth all over the world and youth NGOs all over the world, to influence the negotiations. We cannot negotiate by ourselves. This is done by the negotiators that are appointed from their government. So this is a government official. We are just there as a lobby to influence this. And by joining with SWI, the YOUNGO, we are kind of part in this, or we are kind of the lobbying or part of the lobbying, and you as an individual can do the same to do that, but we are not negotiating or something by ourselves. That's not possible.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what we also envision, that young people actually have a seat at the table and actually are able to negotiate and take decisions, but the framework convention is not yet there at the moment. Only the 197 official parties, these are mainly countries, but for example also the EU, are allowed to negotiate and take decisions. The only way how young people can be involved in this negotiation and decision-making process is if you're taken by the government into the delegation, as I was at the pleasure last year and as well this year, to then be able to negotiate on behalf of my country. But apart from this, I would say that the role doing action, writing policy papers, meeting these governmental officials also is really absolutely crucial. So even if you cannot sit at the table and take the decision yourself, the influence, if we do it correct and really align and strengthen ourselves within YOUNGO and within the Sustainability Week International, we can also achieve a lot until we hopefully at one point can be sitting at the table and take the decision ourselves.
And to that also one more comment, to people ask can we do now during this COVID time. So this is, for example, a great time to join, for example, YOUNGO, because the whole negotiations and what YOUNGO is doing and everything, it's just such a wide and complicated field. So this is now where there is a lot of time until real negotiations going on with SPs or COP26 postponed. You can get slowly involved and see some things and maybe think about where, which field do you want to get engaged and so on, to just have some information. So that's for example, a great time to join, because I can just tell you from my experience what I have done. I actually joined YOUNGO because of the shift from COP25 from Chile to Madrid. So it was shifted, and a lot of batches to go to COP got free because people could not just go to another place. And I went like this, and I didn't really have knowledge before that, and it was such a difficult cold start to go directly to COI with close to zero pre-knowledge and try to see what is going on, because at COP there is so much going on and so many different topics, completely different topics. It's really difficult to find that out in a short time. So that's also something you can do, of course.
Yeah, really, the better that you prepare, can be technical process, can be also thematic you want to work on, or really try to build up your network, for example, in YOUNGO, but also with some negotiators, the more you can make out of your time. Very personal, the first time I joined the COP back in Bonn, was super frustrating to me because I didn't understand anything. I was just running around trying to catch up with everything while being super overwhelmed and frustrated. At the end, I thought I'm never ever joining this conference again. But then luckily, through YOUNGO and other networks, I got confidence and I was learning enough, and I'm now able to negotiate on behalf of my country, but also support other young people to meaningfully be engaged in this very interesting and very crucial and important youth space.
Yeah, there are a lot of very interesting, very active people. You learn a lot about different organizations worldwide and so on. So it's also a very good networking spot on the international base, I would say. And yeah, just a lot of interesting things going on.
Great. And also I wanted to mention, if you didn't have the chance now to ask your question, maybe something is coming up, we are always here. You have all the contact details also here on this slide. So please feel free to reach out to Patrick, me, or also on the email or the social media provided here. We are very happy to support you when you have specific questions or maybe general questions. Yeah, we are very, very happy to support you to get involved. And also we will share, Patrick and I will send the email with the link where you can also sign up directly then to YOUNGO. Yeah, so we are here if there's any other question coming up later on. And thanks a lot for all the happy birthday wishes. Yesterday, the Sustainability Week International celebrated the first anniversary. So yeah, thanks a lot for this.
Yay. Yes, and really do not hesitate to ask questions, because there are so many abbreviations and things are incredibly complicated. So even I got a little bit into it, but still I don't know a lot of things. So yeah, it's good to always ask. So feel free to send an email or contact us on social media. So yeah, thanks a lot for joining. Thank you, Marie-Claire, for telling us all about your knowledge, your now already very deep knowledge. So that was really interesting to hear. And yeah, we wish you all a nice weekend and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Take care.